Good morning, comic book fans. Welcome back to Comics in 5 Minutes. I'm your ever-loving host, Chorty, and I'm going to review Wonder Girl today. And I'm going to do something which I don't usually do when reviewing comic books. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time just talking about the cover. And that's not to say there isn't stuff in the comic book worth talking about. There is, but the cover says a lot about a comic book, and quite often it can just be an advertisement for the comic book, or they can actually start telling the story on the front cover, which a lot more of a bronze silver age kind of thing. You don't see that so much these days, but it's kind of weird. I tend to ignore them and occasionally say, oh wow, that's cool, that's bold or whatever, but there's stuff going on in this one which is worth talking about. Start, we're going to look at just the backdrop to it. We can see there's so much stuff going on there. I think at one point, there's a horse and various people seem to either be falling or drowning, and I think that might be a cow as well. And then there's a city in the backdrop which looks almost mythical, but the buildings seem quite contemporary or modern. And then in the back from that, there's the whole like floating head kind of thing. Obviously, characters are going to be very, very important, but completely covered by the Wonder Girl branding there. And I just feel like, why not just do that as a Virgin cover? Get rid of all that and just show off the artwork, especially because it feels like this is like part of what's going on. But that's not all that's going on. You've also got excellent version, shall we say, of the character on the cover. Now I say version because you never actually see the character look anything like that in the comic book, which makes it, well, it's not really an advertisement for the comic book, or if it is, it's a weird one to do. Some stuff that happens in the background with the things that look like they're drowning, that feels like it could actually be more to do with what's going on in the comic book. But having the warrior woman on the front is like, okay, that's cool. It's like laying out your stall nice and early. But it also made me think of like, well, how we represent women on covers of comic books. There's a quite well-known concept of the passive and aggressive posers, and you usually often see men in active or aggressive poses, women more in passive. And a very first glance at this would say, well, that's just a woman just standing there. But the more you look into it, the more it's clearly not. George Jones has put some effort into this one. Yes, the ride's quite high on the hip, but you can tell from that the legs are slightly differently angled, and there's tension in there as well. My first thought was it's a certain way of like posing for a camera where it's like you drop one hip back and the knee forward, and it just, it kind of accentuates various bits of it. And it's like, it's almost like that, but not quite. It's not passive leaning backwards. That's active going slightly forwards. And yes, you can see from the mouth there, she's screaming. But look at the way the sword's held as well. It's not held loose, it's held ready. Other arm behind the back. And I could spend an awful lot of time talking about armor on female characters, specifically in comic books and fantasy. And yes, the ridiculous boo armor and lots of places without armor seems always a weird concept to me. But there's an extra little bit of attention put in here, because if she's holding the sword in that hand, when you fight with the sword, if that's your lead hand, you don't fight with that arm forward, unless you're fencing. It's merely you fight, put that as a defense. So having that bit as more armor, it's like, okay, that does make a little bit more sense. It's still kind of ridiculous. It still falls into the whole fantasy armor for women. And there's been like just literally dozens of YouTube videos and commentaries and blog posts about this kind of thing. But when you're going to present this as a front and center thing for a female warrior woman character, I think it's worth pointing out like how that's going to present itself. Now, all that being said, how does this play into what going in the comic book? Hardly anything at all. It's actually quite a slow start. Not a bad start, but it's building for something, and it's setting up a lot of stuff, which I think, if you've not been reading, I think some of the future state stuff, Infinite Horizons or Generations Shattered or whatever it is that's going on to lead into a lot of the Infinite Frontier stuff, I think you wouldn't know what's going on. I certainly didn't. So what you get is various nations, either mythical or otherwise, who seem to be aware that Wonder Girl here, I'm assuming this is Wonder Girl, is going back to her home country, and when she gets there, all of a sudden she's going to become a more powerful force. She doesn't really know who she is. They set up quite nicely that she's going to discover something about herself, of her heritage, by visiting Brazil. And they have a little bit of fun with that, of a little old woman asking an innocuous question on a plane and then getting so bored by her long drawn-out answer to it. Nice little riffs on realistic writing there, thoroughly enjoyable. And then you have the bus driver who's kind of really trying hard not to flirt with her, but then she's got blissfully unaware of it, which is a little bit of a trope. That's like not the most original thing in the world, but it's handled with a little bit of style and compassion. It is still a trope. I can't really deny that. But for the most part, it just seems to be building up to something else. And then when you get to the final sequence of something happening to the main character, which drags her from her normal world into something distinctly supernatural, it doesn't feel like it's come out of nowhere, but there's still a sense that the story has yet to complete its build-up. Now, maybe if I've read all the stuff that comes out before this, it would make more sense. People could be watching this now and going, "Oh, Shorty, this is exactly what's going on. We've been waiting for this. It's like something that's been foreshadowed for ages." But sometimes you have to look at a comic book as an issue 1 and think, is this going to be suitable for somebody who's never read anything else come before it? Could this be recommended to somebody to try something out? I think it could, with the understanding that there is a story that they're having to show you through exposition whenever they can, rather than just dropping you straight into it, which means issue 1 is a slow burn. It's an excellent slow burn, but it doesn't have the action in it I would expect for that cover. That's all I'm saying. Enjoyable though. Right, that's it for me. I've got nothing else to review this week, so I'll be back on Tuesday for a new comic book day. Until then, everyone, stay safe. Bye.